G'day painters, today I'm painting Thunderkyn from the Leagues of Votann. Let's skip the intro and get straight to it. First I wanted to show that I magnetised my Thunderkyn. I magnetised these guys before I started recording for YouTube, so I don't actually have any footage of doing it. But all I did was drill down the belt buckle to fit a magnet. Then I just took a thin piece of metal and glued it to the gun. The metal is just from a cheap bake tray that I got from a cheap shop. Overall, it's pretty easy to do and didn't take too long, and it just makes my life way easier when I can't decide between the conversion beamer or the grenade launcher and just keep changing my mind. But now we've covered that, let's get to the painting. As you can see, I undercoated them Gory Red from Vallejo, like I do for a lot of my Votann models. My Votann are dominantly red and blue, and it's way easier to paint blue over red than the other way around. The first thing I'm going to work on is the red, and I'm going to do all the highlighting on the red before moving on. I'm sticking with my normal recipe for my Votann, so that means dragon red to start. The red is the colour that's the deepest and furthest in on the model, and nothing is likely to mess it up when I do the other colours. But if I did the red after other colours, I'm much more likely to mess them up, so it just makes sense to work on the red first. Once the dragon red is blocked in, I come in with red tone to get some definition and shading. I've been thinking about this step a bit lately. I wonder if it'll be quicker to have the gory red as the shadow colour. It means I'll have to be careful when blocking in the dragon red, but it'll let me skip the red tone step. The main thing holding me back from trying it is I feel that the gory red isn't the same tone as the other reds I'm using, and it just might not look great. I might try it out on a test model one time. Once the shade's dry, it's back to dragon red to bring back the mid-tone. A lot of the red's in some pretty deep parts that would just be naturally shadowed, so I'm just not touching them. For the parts I'm hitting, I'm still leaving the shade in the deeper spots or the spots that would be shadowed. Then we're on to the pure red. I'm hitting the same areas as the previous step, but working in smaller areas and just trying to build those highlights up nicely. Then the final step for the red is lava orange. I'm only hitting the folds and edges that the light would really easily pick up. Before we finish the red, there's something red you can do right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn it red. Now that's done, it's on to the blue, and I'm blocking it all in with Dark Sky from Army Painter. The blue and metal are all pretty entwined, so I'll be blocking them both in before moving on to the shading or highlighting for either of them. I do this because I'm trying to move at a decent speed, and how tangled the two colours are, I know I'll make mistakes and mess up the other colour. Doing the blocking in before any shading or highlighting just makes the mistakes far easier to fix. Then it's time to block in the metal. For this I'm using gunmetal. There is a lot of metal on this model and parts that I think could either be blue or metal, so it's worth slowing down a bit and making sure you get all the smaller bits, and think about if you want something to be blue or metal. Once the metal's blocked in and I've tidied up any spots where I hit the blue, it's time for shades. For blue I use Blue Tone from Army Painter. I'm being pretty careful here so I don't have to do any more touching up. But let's be honest, I'm gonna mess up and need to touch something up sooner or later, and that's okay. It's all part of the process. The metal all gets shaded with dark tone. I really want to avoid pulling here as I'm only planning on doing one level of highlighting for the metal, which means I'm skipping the step of bringing back the mid-tone, which is where I'd normally fix any pulling. So it's worth just taking the extra time here to make sure I'm pushing the shade around and just eliminating any pulling. Speaking of highlighting the metal, that's our next step. With Shining Silver, I go around the model doing both edge highlights and picking out the raised parts that the light would be hitting. Now that the metal is done, it's onto the blue. I think I've learned my lesson with the blue, I just can't layer it for whatever reason, so I don't even bother trying this time and just go straight to wet blending. I'm using Dark Sky and Ultramarine Blue as my two colours for the blend. First, I went around the model and put Ultramarine Blue on the raised parts to give me an idea of where I want it. Then I went to work on the blending. For anyone that doesn't know, wet blending is basically what it says on the box. You put both the colours next to each other on the model where you want them, then while they're still wet you work them together to create a smooth transition. You may have to go back and forth between the two colours to get a smooth blend that you're happy with, but it's a pretty simple technique and always gives a nice result. In my experience, it takes a bit longer than layering, which is why layering is my normal go-to. But in cases like this where, for whatever reason, I can't layer the blue, I just do wet blending. Once I'm happy with the smoothness of the transitions, it's time for edge highlights. For this I'm using electric blue. I move around the model, picking out the edges with the side of my brush. New painters often find edge highlighting to be a bit intimidating, but it's actually really easy most of the time. All you have to do is run the side of your brush along the edge. You don't even need a high level of brush control to do it. The brush control only becomes necessary when it's a spot you can't run your brush along the edge, but like everything, it becomes easier with practice. And that's the three main colours done. I'd say it's coming along pretty well. Now it's time to move on to the smaller details. Since the leather is the deepest detail, I decided to do that first. This includes the belt and the straps on the legs. I also paint the magnet as if it were leather so it just doesn't stand out. For this I used Leather Brown from Army Painter. To shade the leather I use Strong Tone from Army Painter. Then for the highlighting, I do a 50-50 mix of Leather Brown and Elvish Flesh and just do an edge highlight. Continuing to work from the inside out, next are the knee pads, pipes and boots. For these parts I'm going with black, and I'll be using the same black recipe as I do for the rest of my Votann. So I start with Necromancer Cloak and work my way around the model, blocking it all in. I'm being pretty careful here as some of the black is up against other colours I've already finished, especially on the pants, and I just don't want to have to fix anything. Then I use a 50-50 mix of Black Templar Contrast and Contrast Medium. Laying this over the Necromancer Cloak takes care of both the shading and highlighting, while giving us a nice black finish. Since the black is only an accent colour in my army, I think this recipe is great. It just takes 2 steps and gives a really good result. We're almost done, just a few details left. And now it's time for the face. I picked tanned flesh for the skin and I carefully block that in. Then I use Stone Golem for the beard and eyebrows. Then I use Flesh Wash for both the skin and the beard. I don't think it's worth using different shades here. It's such a small detail and Flesh Wash will work fine for both. Then I grab some Barbarian Flesh and just use this on the nose and cheekbones for some mild highlights. For the light on the chest, I'm staying consistent with the rest of my Votann army. That means painting it white first, and then Warp Lightning contrast over that. For the lenses on the goggles, I decided to use Oozing Purple. It's a nice pale colour and just gives a hint of colour to them. The final step is one you'll be familiar with if you've watched any of my other videos. It's time to pick out all the rivets. I work around the model with Shinning Silver and pick them all out carefully. It makes a huge difference in the finish of the model and just has a great effect. And we're finished. I'm not happy with the guns, I think it's just too much metal. However, I'm painting to a time limit at the moment as I need to finish my 1000-point army before a tournament next weekend. So they'll stay as they are for now, but I definitely think I'll be revisiting the guns to add some more colour to them and make them fit the rest of the model better. Other than the guns, I'm pretty happy with how these guys have turned out and they're going to look great on the table. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching, drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.